Hey guys, I wanted to take the chance to make a video on some areas of gardening that I think really get us stuck. I am going to be speaking from the heart here a little bit more than our usual tutorials, and I'm going to go through 9 gardening myths that could be stopping you from growing. I split this into 3 categories: expectations, fertility, and soil. So we're going to kind of start philosophical and then we'll work our way into the practical, both of which are really crucial here. And before we go any further, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Taylor. I'm a home gardener, and I help other gardeners upgrade their game with sustainable and regenerative growing techniques. If you are just getting started gardening, or maybe a few seasons under your belt, one of the best ways that you can get access to my best growing techniques is by signing up for our email newsletter. I'll drop a link to that in the description if you want weekly tips and tricks in just 5 minutes or much less if you're a speedy reader. So, starting with the category of expectations, this first myth might feel trite and often repeated, but I think it's actually really still bears repeating. Gardening is such a personal thing, and it can be really easy to compare our gardens to other people's gardens, either in person or on different media platforms like this one, and say everyone's garden is doing better than mine. And that's myth number one. Everyone's garden is better than mine, or at least everyone who matters. And the reality is, this is really an easy way to get stuck for almost no reason. I can remember a time shortly after graduating from college and going on Facebook, I believe it was Facebook something, and seeing an old friend my age that I hadn't seen in years, but they just graduated the same year as me, and they were going on a summer-long trip through Europe. And at first, it really bothered me, even though I didn't really want it to. I tried to stop thinking about how jealous I was of this person, and I kept feeling like, why can't I be doing that right now? Why not me? But eventually, and this took way too long for me to actually get to realize, but eventually it occurred to me that I didn't actually know this person, their circumstances, what they did to be able to go on this adventure. For all I knew, they could have gone $1,000 in debt for this trip, or maybe they worked crazy hard and saved up for it and absolutely deserved it. I didn't know, but at a certain level, I didn't really need to know, because whatever reason they were getting to go on that trip, I wasn't them. I didn't have the same life as them. I hadn't made the same decisions, the sacrifices, the shortcuts, whatever it was that got them there. That wasn't me. And that's why I wasn't touring Europe. When it comes to looking at people's gardens on any social media platform, it is really important to remember, first of all, whatever they did to get there is what they did, not you. And that could mean that they did really work their butt off. Maybe they worked every evening to get it looking nice, and they wake up early in the mornings to weed every single day. Or maybe they had a humongous budget and they hired a team of landscapers to install their garden for them. Maybe they had people that they paid to tend their garden so that they could, just take you through it and take pictures or videos. You just have no idea. And attached to that, especially if when you're watching videos about professionals talk about their gardens, you have to realize that they're showing you everything that they want to show you and nothing else. Speaking from experience, trying to film videos with nice aesthetic backgrounds, there are just some places in the yards that we've gardened in that don't look the best. I, in particular, am a chronic pile maker and a chronic pile leaver. As in, I make piles of stuff around the yard and then I just leave it there. And a lot of the time, I'm literally just kicking it or raking it to the side so that we can film a video in a certain spot. We don't want that pile to be a distraction. We also work really hard to keep our kids' bright colored outdoor toys from cluttering up the screen, because they have so many bikes and scooters and sticks and action figures. It's ridiculous. Anyway, myth one is that everyone's garden is better than mine, hopefully debunked. Myth number two in this category of expectations is that there is something that if you were to use it in your garden, on your soil, on your plants, wherever, that it will get you an instant result. And I'd throw the word easy in there too. Anytime someone like me is trying to sell you on something that they're calling it an easy or a simple thing that you can do that will get you an instant result, most likely, not all the time, but most likely that's not true. And I'll let you behind the curtain on this one a little bit too, because if we do this for our videos, if I was to title a video, 5 homemade gardening input recipes that you can make that range from slightly easy to kind of challenging and finicky that might get you some result in a season or two, no one would select that video to watch. So instead, I'm going to call it Boost Your Garden with These 5 Easy DIY Recipes. It's not a perfectly accurate title for the video, but it gets you in the door so that you can learn something new that could potentially help you in your gardening. Point is, you have to watch for the way that people on the YouTubes and the broader internet market their stuff to you. Because if you don't, if you just go in with the assumption that other people are making decisions and doing things that get them instant results, you're almost always going to be a little disappointed. Now, that's not to say that nothing produces an instant result, but the reason that I'm trying to bust this myth is because gardening is really an inherently long game sort of thing. And this kind of ties into the last myth. When you're just starting out, or if you've only got a few seasons into your new garden and you see other people with amazing gardens, you can start to feel a little desperate and like you're just willing to try anything to get a good result and get a garden like them. Truth is, most gardeners and small farmers will tell you that year 3 is where things really start to click. Those first 2 years are going to be a lot of investment without seeing a ton of above ground results when compared to mature gardens. And this brings us to our third and final expectation related myth that needs busting, and that is that your physical yield is the only thing that matters. This one is especially important for home gardeners, not farmers as much who are relying on an income from their produce, but for them productivity is kind of the top of the list. But for gardeners who are trying to grow a bunch of food to eat or flowers to decorate their house or just create a beautiful aesthetic space to enjoy, it's a dangerous game thinking that production is all that matters. And I'll share a personal story to illustrate this as well. I majored in piano performance at university, and I remember having a kind of bad attitude about some of the pieces that I was studying at the time. And I had a clarinetist friend named Martin who really changed my perspective toward the pieces. And he said this with no intention of making a profound point to me, but I had said to him one day, isn't it kind of annoying how we just practice and practice and practice all so that we can perform these pieces like 1 or 2 times for an audience and then be done with them and move on? And I'll never forget his response. He said something to the effect of, I made a decision a long time ago to not resent practicing because if I hate 90% of my time with the clarinet, that kind of means that I just hate clarinet. And I don't want to hate clarinet. So, as simple as this sounds, it really shaped the way that I see a lot of my life now, in the sense that I'm often so focused on getting to the end result that I completely forget to enjoy any other part of the project, whatever it is. And oh boy, is this relevant for gardening. Harvest is such a small part of what we do. It's amazing and magical and a feeling like none other to get to harvest fruit and veggies and flowers and enjoy them after working so hard for them. But Cassidy and I have made a decision a long time ago to not garden strictly for productivity. As cliche as it sounds, you have to embrace the journey, not just the destination. Gardening is certainly about getting something out of it, but there's almost as much satisfaction to be had from what we put into it. If you hate exercise, hate getting dirty, breathing fresh air, pushing wheelbarrows, or carrying buckets, or raking until the sun goes down, go down the list of everything that's not the production side of things. If you hate all of that and only want to pull some tomatoes off the vine and sit on your patio garden, you probably shouldn't be doing any gardening yourself. A huge reason that I love gardening is because of what it teaches me. Patience, flexibility, innovation, endurance, commitment, resilience. These are just a few of the incredible and invaluable traits that I've been able to develop given the opportunity from learning to garden and trying to grow things. This whole thing is fulfilling largely because of the effort that you put into it. Again, not saying that we never want to enjoy the fruits of our labor, but if that's all you're here for, like, find a new passion, man. Okay, those are my 3 cents on gardening expectations myths that are keeping you stuck. Let me know if any of those resonated with you in the comments, and let's get into a different kind of myth. These ones are around the topic of fertility. And when I say fertility, I'm talking about a plant's nutritional needs for optimum growth and productivity. The first myth, and this may come as no surprise to you if you are a longtime watcher of this channel, is that weak growth in your plant or plants is a sign that you need to add fertilizer to your garden. And this is a really enticing myth, really easy to buy into. It's hard to emphasize this enough, but when I was first starting to garden, I really knew nothing about growing plants, like literally nothing about the actual growing side. I had moved into a house when I was 8 years old that had a really mature, impressive perennial flower garden, already established, and fruit trees and bushes and stuff. And it all just kind of worked on its own, right? I never gave a single thought to the fact that there was a lot of effort put into getting that garden established. So when Cassidy and I put in our first garden bed in our new house, I just cut out a bit of the lawn on a sunny side next to the house and planted some tomato starts that we had bought from a local nursery. I'm pretty sure we had tried starting some of our own tomato starts and we just didn't water them, so they died before we could put them outside. I remember though digging out holes for the tomatoes and just sort of guessing how deep to plant them and kind of expecting them to grow all on their own. And they did actually, pretty slowly. I think we got a few tomatoes in the last week before our first frost. But that year I learned a ton about gardening. I built other garden beds and I cleared space for next season. Thing is, when I was first putting those tomatoes in the ground, I remember thinking, is there something I should be doing to get these to grow a bit better? Now, I was enough of a hippie to intuitively avoid putting chemical fertilizer on my garden beds, but I didn't really know why I shouldn't. When I went to the store, I would see garden products that claimed they could help my plants grow twice as big, twice as fast. And these were tempting initially. And the thing is, these companies have really tapped into a core need for us gardeners, which is that we need to get our plants growing, preferably as fast as possible. Also, we have a very consumer driven culture, at least in the old US of A. If we have a problem, our first reaction oftentimes is just to go out and buy something that will solve the problem. And that's where the fertilizer companies step in and sell you all sorts of stuff, some of which we'll get into in the next myth. Now, back to those tomato plants that we grew, the really interesting thing here is that the following season I grew tomato plants that were twice the size in half the time and probably got 100 times bigger yield. And I did two things to get those results, really three things. The first being that I grew in that same garden bed in consecutive years. The second thing was that I top dressed the soil with decomposed wood shavings and horse manure. And the third thing was that I made a homemade microbial solution from the Jadam Organic Farming book by Young Sung Cho. Those three things got me the results that the fertilizers were promising. So, what happened? How did I solve wheat growth without adding fertilizer? Well, I couldn't have told you at the time, but what I did essentially was rather than cultivating the nutritional quality of the soil, I cultivated the biological quality of the soil by stimulating microbial activity with plant roots, feeding microbes with organic matter, and supplying the soil with an extra boost of robust microorganisms. The myth that we need to overcome here is that the solution to poor fertility is fertilizer, or at least store bought fertilizer. The reality is that microbes provide fertility. And to get into how that works a bit more, we'll take a look into fertility myth number two, which is that every plant needs a unique, specific amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, otherwise known as NPK. And because of that, we are able to provide those exact amounts and optimize plant growth. Back to that first tomato bed that I started, growth was weak initially. I wanted an easy solution. I felt suspicious of store bought fertilizers. But the real reason that I probably never bought any of that stuff was because I didn't want to spend a dime on soil amendments and because it felt too complicated. Like, how much fertilizer should I put on the soil? How do I know if it's the right kind? What brand do I use? Is organic important? I remember visiting my grandma's house and touring her flower garden and seeing in her garage that she had plant specific food for every different flower that she was growing: rose fertilizer, zinnia fertilizer, dahlia fertilizer. So I thought, oh, maybe there's a specific plant fertilizer for my tomatoes. Well, if you go on Amazon, and I encourage you to do so, and just type in tomato fertilizer, just looking at the first 10 products that show up, we've got Farmer's Secret Tomato Booster, Bloom City Tomato and Veggie Plant Food, Fruit and Bloom Booster, Old Farmer's Almanac Tomato and Vegetable Plant Food Spikes, Big Ass Tomatoes, Premium Tomato Fertilizer, Job's Organic Vegetable and Tomato Granular Plant Food, Espoma Organic Tomato Tone, Fox Farm Happy Frog Tomato and Vegetable Fertilizer, Burpee Organic Tomato and Vegetable, and finally, Down to Earth All Natural Fertilizer, All Purpose Tomato and Vegetable Mix. So, imagine me. I know nothing about growing tomatoes, but all of these companies seem to know because they're selling tomato specific fertilizer. These are the nutrients that a tomato plant needs in order to grow to its full potential. Now, what you'd think is that there would be a general consensus with maybe some slight variability, right? Like, everyone pretty much knows that tomatoes need a little more phosphorus than nitrogen and potassium or something like that. And that's where we get into our NPK ratios, right? That's those three little numbers that show up on the bag This plant food contains 3% nitrogen, 8% phosphate, and 7% potash. Thing is, between the 10 tomato fertilizers from Amazon that we just looked at, there is basically no consistency between the fertilizer NPK ratios. Like, I couldn't have planned a better illustration for inconsistency and the apparent irrelevancy of specific quantities of plant available nutrients if I had tried. These were literally the first 10 that showed up on Amazon. And so it begs the question, why are each of these companies marketing a tomato fertilizer when there seems to be no real consensus on what a tomato plant actually needs? I can't exactly answer that question, and I can't actually say that NPK doesn't matter, nor can I say that specific plants don't need specific amounts of nutrients to thrive. That's all actually true. What I will boldly claim, though, is that as gardeners, we have very little control over almost any of this. This being feeding a plant a specific diet. And this is a big hurdle for a lot of gardeners to jump over because it's not exactly intuitive, nor is it even very well understood. But the truth is, we don't feed plants nutrients. The microbes in the soil feed plants. And our job is to feed the microbes and create the conditions for them to thrive, and in some cases, introducing them to the soil and our plants in the first place. See, what I've come to realize is that the plant seems to be the most informed on what it needs, nutritionally speaking. And the way that it gets those nutrients is not by asking me to feed it lab-made set of chemicals. Its primary mode of asking for nutrients is by sending out signals in the form of sugary liquid carbohydrates that come out of its roots. We call these root exudates. And also by tapping into fungal networks who can read the plant's signals and send messages to other plants in the nearby area who can maybe share. The point is, in truly fertile soil, biologically speaking, plants engage in a robust economy of nutrient exchange that is kind of out of our purview. It's not that we don't do anything as gardeners to help this facilitation happen, but we really need to be worrying more about those microbes and their food sources than our plants' food sources. We'll dip back into this in a minute when we get into our three soil myths. But before I go on, I think a very relevant myth that needs overcoming is a pretty easy one to buy into, given the educational landscape on YouTube when it comes to more natural, low intervention growing techniques. I'm far from the only person who will tell you to ditch the fertilizers. But there's an interesting replacement that many gardeners mythologize. And the myth that I'm referring to here is that compost solves every growing problem. And I bring this up because I believed this for quite some time. It's easy to think that compost will solve almost every garden ailment because, frankly, it solves a lot of them. And there's a whole way of gardening, largely in the market garden space, that says to do any garden bed, all you got to do is put down cardboard and compost over your lawn and you can plant right into it, no questions asked. Well, I have a few questions that I wish someone had asked me when we first started this. Like, how's your soil compaction? What kind of weeds are growing in your area already? What's the history of this growing space? And there's so many more questions worth asking before just slapping compost down and expecting your garden to burst full of life in one season. Now, keep in mind, I'm not saying that cardboard and compost won't work at all. And I actually think it's a great way, probably one of the best ways to start a garden initially. But it's unfortunately a myth that compost is a one size fits all cure all for every garden ailment. And it's an easy myth to buy into considering the fact that compost does help solve a lot of gardening problems. Putting down healthy compost is going to be a way more effective in the long run than using chemical fertilizers in your plants. But sometimes there are other problems that need addressing that compost just can't solve. This is especially relevant for store-bought composts or bulk ordered compost. Again, these totally have their place, but they can also be limited in their helpfulness. A lot of store-bought composts can be still pretty undecomposed, which can mean either that it's going to come in hot and contain too much water-soluble nitrogen and burn your plants, or it's going to come in cold and woody and rob your plants of nitrogen. I'm always a fan of homemade compost, but I also recognize that it's not always an option for people. All I'd say is go for quality over quantity when it comes to compost, and don't expect it to be the only thing that makes your plants grow, especially if there are other problems with your soil. Speaking of soil, we've been hovering over this for a bit now, but it's time that we jumped into our third and final category of gardening myths. And the first myth here is simply what I call the dirt myth. And yes, I know this is semantics, but let me explain. Dirt is a bad word in our house. If you look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of dirt, it says a filthy or soiling substance, such as mud, dust, or grime. The earliest usages of the term dirt literally refer to, quote, something worthless. Go outside in your garden, or in nature, or somewhere that plants are growing, and scoop up a handful of soil. And actually do this because it's a genuinely impactful meditative experience. When you have your handful of soil, take a look at it and think about the fact that what you're looking at is closer to a planet's worth of life than something that we could call worthless, filthy, mud, dust, or grime. Scientists have placed numbers in the billions or even trillions in some cases of microorganisms that live in a single handful of soil, meaning that we're not holding dirt. We're not even holding a combination of sand, clay, silt, and organic matter. We're holding tens of thousands of nematodes, millions of protozoa, billions of bacterial cells, not to mention fungi, viruses, archaea, and other creatures visible to the naked eye like earthworms and arthropods. Just try to wrap your mind around what you're holding and realize its sanctity. It's easy to take this for granted, and that's why, while it's a relatively small shift, I prefer using the word soil over dirt when I'm referring to this incredible substance that contains a universe worth of activity. Again, soil doesn't really mean anything in and of itself, but that distinction matters to me. Dirt is worthless. When I speak about the growing medium for my plants, I like to use the word soil. Soil is alive and worth taking care of, worth stewarding well. And that brings us to soil myth number two, and that is actually a kind of a two for one, two sides of the same coin, and that coin is tillage. The myth when it comes to tillage, in my opinion, is that there's one right way to do it. The myth is that tillage is something that you should never, ever, ever do under any circumstance, or that tillage is an essential component of any serious grower, gardener, or farmer. Back to my early years, learning how to garden from scratch, I remember hearing that tillage was not ideal at best and evil at worst. This led me to believe, along with the help of YouTubers and authors, that there was no reason to till my soil. Just follow the formula that I mentioned earlier. Lay down cardboard, layer on some compost. And I did this for a relatively large garden patch in the backyard where I tried to expand my growing operation, and it resulted in a struggling garden that year. Now, there are many factors at play here and no one exact reason for that. But what I will say is that the following year, I expanded the garden again, this time by a pretty substantial amount, and I decided to till to kick things off. I had also grown a cover crop mix, spread compost, and some other homemade inputs, but my soil just seemed a bit compact. So I decided to do a one-time till to get the compaction initially broken up and mix in the organic matter, and boy, am I glad that I did, because as a result, everything just kind of kicked into place the next growing season. Now, I'm not saying that there's a specific rule for tilling. In fact, that's exactly the opposite. The myth is that there's only one way to interact with tillage. The fact is, if you have a compaction layer where you're trying to expand your garden, it might really help to get that broken up initially to kick things off. Tilling repeatedly comes with a host of issues that can result in greater and greater compaction over time. You kill off soil biology, you destroy soil structure, the list goes on. But an initial till can really be a help for some people. A couple of things to look for if you're thinking about tilling. What are you hoping to accomplish? If you're hoping to break new ground, great. Tilling could really help there. I would recommend doing a simple compaction test first. You can take a piece of rebar or a garden spade even and just do a test. Start by picking a space in your property where you know that there's a lot of foot traffic or where cars have driven maybe or something. And then take your tool and put some body weight into it. You'll see how it feels underneath you. You'll see how it sinks into the soil or not. Try to do this while the ground is a little damp. And then go to a place where you're thinking of growing, get any weeds out of the way, and try sinking your tool into that soil. This is a very low key, basic way of testing for compaction, but it can kind of give you an idea. You can sort of compare the fully compacted soil with a space that hasn't been walked on too much yet and see what the difference is. Now, if you're looking at out of your property and you see a bunch of weeds that you're just trying to get rid of, tilling is not actually going to be a great solution to the problem in my experience. Anytime that you till, you're actually going to give a host of weeds a second chance at life by bringing them closer to the soil surface where they can germinate and kickstart their own garden. Pretty much anytime that you till, you're going to be greatly benefited by spreading a tarp or landscape fabric over the soil surface and letting the weeds kill themselves trying to find sunlight. And if you don't have really bad compaction, you might as well just mow down the weeds and spread the tarp over the top to kill them and preserve your soil structure. Point is, don't buy into the never till, always till dichotomy. The only thing I can't really get on board with is yearly tilling. Of course, you got to do what you got to do, but I don't think that a repeated regular tilling is going to get you the results that you actually want in your garden. That said, your situation calls for specific direction, and following the wrong path here can waste your time and cost you years, not to mention discouragement. And speaking of discouragement, one of the most discouraging things that you can experience as a gardener, in my opinion, is in relation to losing a crop or plant to pest pressure or disease. And our last myth to overcome here is the lie that pests and diseases in your garden mean that you messed up. The reality is that a lot of stuff can cause pest pressure and disease. And they're also two separate issues, but I'm kind of lumping them together because they feel like things that oftentimes happen totally out of your control and can be truly devastating when they do. And it's a tricky thing because in conventional circles, pests and disease are really not looked at very closely at all. It's almost assumed that they're going to happen. And so you just have to buy certain things that will solve the problem, namely pesticides and fungicides. But using these runs the risk of neglecting root causes, where a lot of regenerative and natural growers like myself come in. I generally see pests and disease as signs of imbalance in the garden. Now, I've seen virtually no disease on our plants since using our natural homemade microbial amendments that fight against plant pathogens, but pests have been an issue in nearly every garden that I've started at some level. The theory behind pests and when they get out of control is largely that there is an imbalance in your microecosystem. There aren't enough predators of pests because there aren't enough beneficial native plants or pollinators to draw them in, and it's a, sort of circle of life thing. And so I generally believe that when you fix the broader ecosystem, pest pressure will balance itself out on its own. And I've experienced that alleviation. But to say that either of these things, diseases or pests, are your fault as a gardener because you didn't plant enough beneficials or you're not creating a hospitable enough environment for local wildlife to come in and help achieve balance, or you didn't clean up disease crop residue properly and it's spread to your other plants or whatever, to say that it's your fault isn't exactly helpful, and sometimes it can be pretty discouraging. The reality is, as I've said before, we're dealing with nature here, and the natural world takes a while to sort itself out, especially when someone comes in and disrupts the local order by planting in a big old garden full of delicious food. Lawns are often what home growers are converting to gardens, but after having no other options but grass to feed on, your new little veggie patch is going to look like an awfully good treat for the native insects that have been starved out, especially if your neighbors aren't contributing much in the way of pollinator attracting plants or natives and or are practicing pesticide and herbicide usage. Those sprays can float on the wind, contaminate nearby ground, and sometimes cause serious harm there. You just don't know what has happened on your land or what is happening around your garden where you're trying to grow. So, hopefully, I could break up that myth if you're carrying it around. I think growing plants can be one of the most rewarding things in the world. These are a few of the myths that get us stuck and suck the joy out of it. To conclude, I want to address maybe one more bonus round of myth, and that is that gardening is too complicated to understand and therefore I shouldn't be a gardener. And I think that this is a pretty dangerous one for a lot of people. It certainly was for me. And now I often fall into the category of people who maybe overcomplicate it now that I understand it a tiny bit better. But the reality is, yes, the processes at work are highly complicated and multifaceted. However, it's also something that people have been doing for thousands of years. You can do it. So I just want to conclude by saying if you ever hear me say something that doesn't quite make sense or feels super complicated, overly complicated perhaps, and you feel like that's something you just can't do, please don't let me or anyone else stop you from enjoying your garden. If you're looking to solve problems in your garden, maybe you are trying to eradicate disease, maybe your plants aren't producing well enough for you, whatever it is, there may be something that you can learn from this channel on how to care for your soil or bless your plants. But at the end of the day, we're putting seeds in the ground and watering them. All the other stuff is kind of extra and it's not worth letting it bog you down. My encouragement to you is that if you want to try anything that we teach on this channel or anywhere that you learn on any of the other many amazing channels on YouTube, it's that I want you to take things slow and add one thing at a time. Take the time to actually apply and observe and learn what is happening little by little so that you know it's actually working. If you try out a new homemade plant spray, track how the plants you sprayed it on actually do. Maybe leave a control plant that you don't spray. And overall, lower your expectations for how fast change will actually occur in your garden. Try to think season to season, not week to week or month to month, even. And then if things do recover or explode faster, that'll just be a nice bonus. Now, if you are looking for a way to steadily increase your knowledge of plant and soil life, as I mentioned before, you can sign up for my email newsletter. I send out emails nearly every week that are designed to teach you ways that you can upgrade your gardening game. These take less than 5 minutes to read. And if you want to dive deeper on any of the topics that I cover, I try to include links to extra resources that I have found helpful. You can sign up for that by hitting the link in the description. Thank you for watching this, and we'll see you in the next video.